Thanks for the invitation to speak at this meeting. It is on the, at least for some of you, you will have read 2 papers of me, Skin Brains and Demarcating Cognition. This will be sort of more beyond that because so far some time ago. So it is on how to construct a subjective perspective, a visit to 2 building sites. Before moving there, I'll make this meta remark. And basically my point here is that it is a bit open-ended talk. It is rather wide, I think. Yeah. And basically you shouldn't take everything. Basically what I'm going to do is just trying out different ways of interpreting problems related to the mind. So I'm not defending a substantial claim, or I'm sort of sketching a sort of a landscape of theoretical options, conceptual positions, and you best treat it, I think, as a preliminary report of a sort of scouting session, a scouting mission in what I think of as new territory. So I'm not really defending, providing clear arguments. I'm just showing you the grounds, and that's also why the building sites are sort of appropriate, I think. What I'm going to talk about is the idea of how can you even construct a subjective point of view. What do I mean with a subjective point of view? I have here pictures, one of Ernst Mach's own reclining picture, where he looks out of his left eye, and what you see is an external world, and we are in Ernst's personal space, so to say, where we look at that world. So this is what I take to be a subjective point of view. You can also think of Thomas Nagel's bed, and basically that would be about how a selfie would look like for the bed himself. So not like our camera, but something that we can even imagine. But there is something what it is like to see the world from a bed's perspective. The idea here is that, in contrast to sort of standard interpretation, this should be thought of as a fully natural and evolved organization. And it is not meant to be unifying the subjective and the objective, so having 2 separate things that are meshed together, but rather from a naturalistic perspective, thinking of them as a unity in the first place, something of parts that come together at one go, that belong together. So that's the main idea here. Something about the context. My main focus is always, for many, many years now, embodied cognition. So I'm into sensory motor theories and autopoietic approaches. A bit less on enactivism and phenomenology, but they're in the background. But that's sort of biological sensory motor context. Currently, I'm most into basal cognition. That will be familiar to all, or at least most of you. So I enjoyed working with Pamela Lyon for quite a long time. And her influence is everywhere in what I do. And also Godfrey Smith is someone that I learned from a lot, and whom I feel close in conceptualizing this domain. And these 2 are the 2 papers that at least some of you read. What I will try to do is move beyond both papers, so it will not, if you've read the demarcation paper, not be about sort of making this decision to focus on cognition as an empirical domain, but actually trying to move ahead a little bit. So that's the main idea. It will be about a current, or my single, must say, current book project. The provisional title, Blobs of View, The Origin of Animal Subjects and Their Macroscopic Worlds. It all started out as with Skin Brains, that paper, and other papers related to it. But it evolved since then into a project with a wider scope, namely the origins of animal subject perspective as a natural phenomenon, as I just said. There are 2 central questions here that I would like to focus on in this talk, or at least have them on the table. The first one is, how can natural processes over evolutionary time have given rise organisms with an inner subjective perspective on a macroscopic external world. So basically, how can you be there, sitting, looking at a screen, and see a talking head? How can that be, given what we know of naturalism and how the world is as a physical entity, a physical domain? So that's one side of it. How can we be here? But also, what might subjectivity be when it is literally specific natural phenomena originated as an evolved feature exhibited within a specific lineage of living systems, animals, so to say. So it is following the demarcation paper where you sort of disregard your own standard interpretation of what subjectivity is, what a subjective perspective is, and try to really build it up within a naturalistic context. Which brings us to not yet an important, well, forgot this slide. Before going there, there's one important differentiation that you should take into account, and that is between, on the one hand, phenomenal consciousness, where the zombie problems are, and focus on a subjective first-person perspective. I just make no claims about phenomenal consciousness. I focus on having the perspective about being Ernst Mach, so to say, being yourself and looking out at the world. Whether this is conscious or not is not something that I will get into. And I will claim, or I will work as if they are different issues, at least for now. And I think that it's possible to make progress with the animal subjectivity ID, with having a first-person perspective, while just setting aside phenomenal consciousness for now, and at least within this talk. What happened? That is because now and just sort of we have here is the idea of what a subjective perspective is, the domain. Intuitively, that's what I will be working with. And so no theoretical claims of what it is yet. Intuitively, it's just the place where sensory processes feed into. You look at the screen right now, or you look at the screen, or looking at a different screen, and this feeds into the behavior that we at this particular moment exhibit. And this is so that this is you inside, so to say. And it is also the place or perspective or a domain where information processing, the classic cognitive science approach nowadays, is not really a clear answer, I would hold. We can imagine that it must be given an answer, but it is not so clear what this answer might be, basically. And this brings me to sort of the overview. We've sort of moved beyond the first part, constructing a subjective point of view, and now I want to show you two building sites, I call them, as an analogy, and they relate roughly to the two papers you've read. The first one is what are nervous systems in the first place, and I sort of say a little bit about that. I won't make it too long, too detailed, but just to give a setting. And we'll say something about the second building site, ongoing work on what objective perspectives might be, given something that I want to introduce here, called naturalism. And then there's a conclusion. Basically, that will be the structure. And yeah, what is very important for this visit is that basically, I'll start with a quote by Larry Lorden. It is the solution which allows us to recognize the problem as a genuine problem at all. This is my leading motive here. So basically what I think I have with skin-brain thesis style way of reasoning is a solution, but I'm less clear on what needs to be, do more work on what the problem is. What is the problem that is being solved by this way of thinking? And this brings me to the work on the origins of nervous system, because that's the focus here. I will discuss two options for the initial organization of nervous systems, and there's an asterisk there because these are not the only two options that are possible. Last few years, there has been a lot of work on this. There are many more options. These two options are not mutually exclusive. Is now talk about chemical brains. You can have them same or separately evolving in the same lineage and so on. We will focus here on two different basic interpretations of nervous systems. On the one hand, the input-output perspective, and on the other hand, what I call internal coordination. The input-output perspective is a standard view, and basically it takes the brain as a kind of way station. Information coming in, being processed, then information going out. And that basic picture is everywhere. I ducked for 2 minutes or less and came up with these images, and there were dozens of others that I could have used. But basically, these are the kind of pictures that you see. There's a sensory input, there's motor output, and there's something in between. And the something in between is the place where the magic happens. And the magic is now considered to be information processing. Information processing is a very flexible world that you might apply to all sorts of things. So it's not super clear what really happens. Even though there's a lot of different work going on, like workspace theory and so on, information integration, and I will not go into it. I just want to have this sketch present. And then the other is less known or less sort of developed also. And this is something that comes up more prominently when you look at the very first nervous systems, or speculate, theorize about early nervous systems. The picture is of a hydra, and what you see is the nerve net that is present in the hydra's body. There's a stalk in the bottom where it's attached or can attach itself to a surface. Then there's the body where the stomach is, and you see the onsets of a number of tentacles, where the black coloring signals the presence of nerves, and they are dispersed in a nerve net structure extended across the body. And what you see if you look at Hydra instead of a simple card as like a Breitenberg vehicle or something like that, is that there is no clear specific input and output here. There's just a body which is extended, which can bend all over. And sensing in a similar way is going on all over the body. What is going on here, which is important for the intercoordination idea, is that when contractions of muscle across this body or these tentacles induce shape changes, they produce all sorts of changes in the scattered sensory devices at the cellular level, all over and in the body. So what you have is a basic sensory motor theory scenario here. And I assume that you know what this is. Basically, it means that if you move about, then this will impose changes on your sensory devices. I will sort of say a bit more on this here. This is where the blobs of UID comes from. That's sort of published in a paper from 2015, moving and sensing without input and output. And basically, it's the story that I just told. If you've got a blob-like, a slug-like organism that is able to move itself, then the patterning of the muscles to move itself should be organized in some way. And at the same time, doing this requires internal feedback to make this movement predictable and adaptable and stabilize. As soon as you have this, also it generates automatically a sensitivity to adjacent external events. So having this organization allows you to sense at the larger scale. And similar to a blind person with a cane, where the cane touching something is something that is detected in within the arm of the person holding the cane. It doesn't mean that there are no external sensors here, but meant to pose or clarify the message that such a blob allows you to signal with the body itself to some extent. So this is another picture to bring this idea across. Being a blob of you, so what you see in the yellow figures is the contractile capacities of a blob-like organism and the way it feeds back on the world. The idea is that this can be done without any external sensors, but will be improved by adding them, as you see on the right. The sensitivity to self-initiated changes in body shape makes the animal sensitive to external disturbances of initiated changes at a macroscopic bodily scale through the nerve net. So that's basically what is going on here. And, well, you might ask, if this is a solution, then what was your problem that you're aiming to solve here, Lorden style? And I want to mention 3 potential problems that are relevant. 2 already introduced, but the first one not yet, because this is more specifically tailored to the specific organization. That's the problem. How can a basically microscopic cellular organization transform into a multicellular one, an animal for say, that is capable of handling macroscopic arrays as a way to access information about body and environment at the macroscopic scale. The mouthful, basically I want to illustrate in this way. I've got a few pictures of a few bacteria here. They're the dots on the left. And what you see mostly here is that they're quite small. And, well, they live in their own world, microscopic one. What you see on the other end, the flies and the ants, is that they live in a totally different world. They live in a world where you can fly around, where you have large entities like cookies or leaves that you can cut and walk across branches. So what you see here is a change of animal or organismal organization from very small to very large in ways that must be sort of enabled in some form. The whole idea is that this blob perspective allows you to do so. Basically what is going on here is that task that can be very simple at a certain scale, like building something from small blocks, as any child can do, and make towers and things, becomes a totally different task if the blocks become much larger, like Stonehenge. Building Stonehenge is something that needs a complex social organization, that needs all sorts of extras and paraphernalia to enable it to bring it into being. And actually what must be done, or what has happened when we sort of look at the transition from single cells to multicellular animal life, is that you need a totally different, or at least significantly different organization to enable doing the sort of same or similar task at a much larger scale. So that's the answer to what the problem was in the first place for these where the blobs of you are a solution for. But there are more problems or more issues here. These are the following. I already mentioned them. How can natural processes over evolutionary time have given rise to organisms with an inner subjective perspective on a macroscopic external world? How can this be? What did happen there? And also, what might subjectivity be when it is literally something that originated in this lineage and had this effect on organism? Or what is going on here? What has evolved over time? About that, the process that it happened, and what is the result of this? And if we look at what the current state of affairs is that what is present is actually what I will call conceptual dualism. That means that you don't necessarily believe in something which is not material or such, but that you believe in two different entities or ways of being in the world, of having sort of organizations within the world that a differentiation between an objective world or environment with objects, events, etc. On the other hand, agents, brains, minds, cognitive systems, what you may have. And basically, this is the starting point. Like you are sitting, or maybe standing right now, looking at the screen. There's the outside world, that is your inner experience or your inner perspective, leaving the phenomenality out for here. And this is just starting point. This is what is there. This is what is given, the idea. And I added a part of Susan Hurley's horizontal modularity picture, just to signal that even if you go from a sort of strict internalism to an embodied externalist picture, still, or most people, yeah, basically everyone, I think, that might be something for debate, still works with this distinction between world and mind as two separate domains. And okay, maybe that's true, maybe that's, but when I think of naturalism, I'm not happy with this picture that just assumes that thing will be solved. Naturalism is something where you are painting the floor of the whole world and paint it all over, and you're working away. In the end, there's you painting, us, scientists, philosophers, and so on. And we, with all our love for beauty, mathematics, all our emotions and stuff, we are now standing in a corner where we're trying to sort of fix the job or finish the job and see where it goes. And then we will have to come up with some decision of what to do. Is information processing as we have it right now, is that sufficient to handle beauty? Is it sufficient to handle fun? Is it sufficient to module love or explain what it is that we have? Can we really do that? And basically the reason for sort of considering this as a serious question is that I have this solution that I just presented with the blobs of you. Having with this solution, then all sorts of possible new problems came into focus. And this is why I expanded the project and why it became actually sort of, yeah, natural development of something which was very basic and focusing on very basic animals. This brings me to my second building site. What are subjective perspectives? And here a concept I want to introduce. So now what this is what I will do. Just move ahead, I think. So building site 2 is about what subjective perspectives are. And the first thing to notice is this quote from Busaki. And he asks a sort of self-evident question. And he gives, well, you might dispute this a bit, but basically this is what he said. The question is this: where do the behavioral cognitive concepts that contemporary cognitive neuroscience operates with come from? Where do our concepts come from, like memory, like attention, like perception, action, what you may have? These are all very old concepts. They come from sort of basic, endlessly recuperated or regenerated sets of ways of thinking about what is going on in our minds and now in our brains. And actually, well, you might consider whether this is still sufficient for a modern age. So, returning to my answer, the blobs of you, and now we sort of want maybe to rephrase the problem or rephrase the question to what this is the answer. What might subjectivity be when it is literally a specific natural phenomenon? And I've said it a few times before, so what changes here, what I want to focus on is that if we are naturalists, if we believe that the natural sciences provide the best description of the world that we might care about or that we might want to have, we must really go for it and have a full naturalism. When it comes to full naturalism, I think there are two important issues. The first one is this. It works within the constraints set out by the various sciences, and within this context, scientists and theoreticians can make their own suggestions for amendments, additions, and changes with respect to these constraints. So it's rather flexible what naturalism is. This might seem self-evident, but actually in practice it is a sort of different view on naturalism compared to what is very dominant, prominent in modern philosophy of mind, philosophy of cognitive science. There's another thing. Also, that naturalism has the long-term obligation to give an account of our own, and thus also the scientists' objective perspective on the world within this naturalistic context and the explanatory possibilities therein. So the issue here is not so much that we must be sort of consistent with what we know from the natural sciences, but we must explain this within the context of the natural sciences. And this is an intriguing sort of requirement that has important implications, I think. So we'll go now to both of these issues one by one. And first focus on the idea of full naturalism as an open-ended enterprise. What I'm thinking of here is actually very basic, very standard, or it used to be standard. It's the classic, one might say, interpretation of naturalism that roughly, at least to some extent, can be linked to the old work by Quine and Nelson Goodman. Focus is on a holism. You don't focus on one particular naturalistic claim, on one particular scientific claim, but you present it in a wider context. If we now find sort of, you say it, a vertebrate from 1 billion years old, then we would really have a problem with our natural science or current understanding of the evolution of how the story went, because it just doesn't fit the evidence. So one single fossil would sort of have a tremendous impact on all sorts of scientific fields. Holism is important. Universal revisability. You might have to change long cherished and sort of totally established parts of the natural sciences or certain fields when new evidence comes in, when new theoretical insights are developed. And this is all classic. This is something that, well, I think we should self-evidently accept when we talk about naturalism. But Quine and Goodman, in their view, when they worked, it was some time ago. I want to adapt it here more to a biological embodiment-oriented context, so that we can focus on the current situation and see what this bears for naturalism in a cognitive science, biological, basal cognition context. So what this provides, this new evidence, this current context, is feedback and change to assimilate, and so the importance to assimilate new phenomena and insights into what we think of as naturalism and what is plausible given naturalism. That's the basic idea. And there are a few more specific items that are sort of more specific on what I just told. The first one is the current link between naturalism and metaphysics. What you often come across nowadays in all sorts of literature is naturalism is a sort of physicalism, Basically, what naturalism amounts to in these texts is just a metaphysical position. If I am a naturalist, I take in a metaphysical position rather than just taking natural science or science in general. What seems to be going on here is that the natural sciences are treated as metaphysical foundation for metaphysical work. The notion of naturalism is sort of stabilized, I think, fits this specific role. And one of the requirements here that you can derive from naturalism in this context is that there is a strong, it is not allowed to admit to spooky stuff. Anything that resembles something which is not strictly material seems to be a no-go. So from that perspective, I'm sitting too still. There is nothing, basically it limits the possibilities for rethinking what mind might be to things that we already know. And this is sort of, it is a very strong requirement on what might be sort of used as explanatory strategies in the cognitive sciences. So in contrast, full naturalism is committed to working as a part of the general scientific picture of the world. Empirical reinterpretation is not a problem. That is something that is to be expected. And if we must accept something that some of us would consider spooky, like dark mass or dark matter, like in physics, then we can just sort of help ourselves to whatever is necessary to make sense of us being here, having a discussion on spooky stuff, say. So naturalism is much more open-ended than the metaphysicians tend to sort of suggest, I would hope. Next stop. Attention with conceptual dualism. Conceptual dualism says that mental phenomena are at least conceptually separate from the natural world. They are a different domain. You cannot expect that they are the same as natural entities. They're slightly different. And full naturalism denies this as an option. It doesn't allow it because natural sciences are what the best story that we have of what exists in the world. So if we think of phenomenality as something that exists, then they must be part of that story. Otherwise, we will have a problem with holism. So given naturalism, in full naturalism, I should say, mental phenomena are by definition part of the natural world, need to be contextualized from within this context. Any story that is legitimate from this perspective must be formulated within this context. Including that mental phenomena are real, I would hold. Well, you might I think the evidence is very strong that we really are conscious, that we really have a perspective. So options that in some parts of philosophy mind are now entertained about illusionism or so is not readily acceptable from this perspective. Non-existence of mental phenomena is not an option. But this is the line of thinking. This is also why I say this is a scouting mission. These are the implications of thinking in this way. I didn't claim all this. It's just how things look like if you follow this route. Similarly with the next one, differentiation of naturalism and naturalization. Naturalization is the standard way of handling cognitive science or mental concept, mental phenomena. It means rephrasing, a reconciliation of fitting classic mental concepts or mental phenomena within the constraints as set by the natural sciences. So you shouldn't allow for spooky things. The issue is whether it is not in contradiction with physical claims, should fit within naturalism. Full naturalism makes a slightly different claim. It aims not so much to fit what we now think of as mental phenomena, but it aims to reconceive mental phenomena as naturally arising. If we want to make sense of what the mind is, or what a subjective perspective is, or what consciousness is, then we should work within the world and see that it fits. So this doesn't mean that we must reduce everything to what we currently see as naturalism, but we must make sure that our way of looking at the natural world allows us to be here. So while in naturalization you are thinking of the mind as an alien that must somehow sort of fit it into our current society, while actually it doesn't fit so much, and you come into a scenario like that, here we are natural beings that are sort of belonging to the natural world. We should be accommodated within this, even when naturalism may need some changes to make this work out, because science should adapt itself to the phenomena and not the other way around. So basically that's the mindset. Then we come to the second part of the full naturalism. That is that it must incorporate subjectivity. Naturalism has the long-term obligation to give an account of our own, and thus also the scientist's subjective perspective on the world within this naturalistic context and the explanatory possibilities therein. Basically, this is also an antidote to the idea that if I say that subjective experience or subjective perspective must be amenable to a naturalistic treatment, then the point is not that it can be sort of limited within a given naturalistic context. It is exactly the other way around. That must be made, it must be positioned within it. So it is making naturalism flexible rather than, well, it is flexible on both sides, of course, but it makes naturalism flexible in a way that was not self-evident in the ordinary interpretations, less fully naturalistic forms of naturalism. Basically, it is an obligation. It is essential that sometime this will be done, as without subjects, no science, without a hand, no hand can be drawn, so to say, to make a reference to the figure here. Again, some are sort of more specifications that follow from this or are linked to this, things that are to be put up for consideration. So the demarcation cognition paper was very critical about the ascription of mental phenomena. This is where this plays out. When it comes to mental phenomena, having just an observer ascription by someone like us is just not sufficient as a criterion for having, say, a perspective. A very nice example, and maybe controversial here, is the Turing test. If an interviewer must or comes to the decision that the computer definitely is a human being, then this would not be considered sufficient evidence to think of it as having or being an example of a mindful entity, something where mental phenomena would be taking place. This is not the criterion that we should use when it comes to that, because we can easily be fooled, and does not address the problem what we and when we look at ourselves are having when we are having our first person perspective. What we need from this perspective is that we need a constitution of mental phenomena as a fact of the matter. We must know what it is, what it can be, and how it works. Given the naturalistic context, that does not start with the presence of an observer or an ascriber. Matthew just showed me my own book from a long time ago. Basically, what I said there was introduce a concept what is very useful here, which is theoretical hitchhiking. The idea is very simple, basically. When we come into a room, we are always there into the room, and it is like having an influence on what you see and what you interpret as being there. So when I look into my refrigerator, there's always a light on. It's because I open it, and I do an effort in opening the refrigerator and making the light shine out. This implies what the idea here is that as long as we present and actively contributing to what is going on in a certain condition, like having an agent or being mindful, then this should not derive from my interpretation as such, but it should be part of an independent story that develops having the mentality from within the world itself. And then I'm thinking about the say the blob of view, where can come up with a sort of account how, evolutionary speaking, such perspectives came into being in the first place, and the need to have work from such an account, which also links up with the demarcating. Another issue here is the presence of the world itself and its descriptions. Idea here is that this world, the world that each of us knows and describes, so depends on our bodily organization and behavior. It's not just out there. We don't find ourselves, physically speaking, in a world pre-cluttered with bottles, computers, sunsets, and things like that. These are articulations. These are ways of demarcating the world in ways that fit us. And if we would be another animal, then the world would look very different to that other animal. This is linked to what I just said about how the world shows up to us as a macroscopic affair. When at heart, when we started out as living systems, we, our ancestors, of course, not our youth, is that we started out as a world that was a microscopic affair, which was very different from what we are living now. It fits in rather nicely, I think, with Nelson Goodman's ways of world making. And this quote: "Truth must be otherwise conceived than as correspondence with a ready-made world." We are in the world, in the work of world making, the fabrication of facts. Well, this is sort of mundane knowledge. If you are a Latour fan or certain fields of philosophy, it is not the standard philosophy of mind enterprise, where we think of the world as given, and perception is a way of representing that which is given. So if you make subjects as something that must derive from the world, it is much more difficult to you cannot use that starting point so well. And this is one way to show it, going back to the fly on the cookie. For us, this cookie is a cookie. For the fly, it's just sugar and other stuff that it can sort of take in. What this implies is that from this subjectivity perspective and from the blobs of view perspective, you just cannot assume a ready-made world provides an independent basis for information processing. In this context, also the concept of representation is sort of showing why there are problems there, but I won't go into that. The problem, I think, is even deeper with information processing itself. And actually with the need for an ontogeny of information, like Susan Oyama has been arguing in her sort of classic book for a long time. There is a lot of data out there, of course, but seeing the world in the terms that are meaningful to us, like ants carrying parts of leaves across a branch, this is something that's there for us, which is also showing if you want to make a self-driving, self-steering car that just don't have these concepts, and it must rely on sorts of cues. It shows how difficult it is to have this world in this particular interpretation. For flies, there are no cookies, there is sugar, to say. And then finally, I'm almost done. Yeah, sort of more or less on time. Might be problems for reduction too. And I'm sort of very hesitant also because many people react to this very strongly. So everything depends on your reading of reduction. But when you think of reduction in terms in which the lowest level, say quantum foam or whatever may be there deep down at the basic level, is what's really out there, and the need for having the scientists doing science and producing its articulation of the world might be something of an issue. So you might provide a fundamental theory of the universe, but you can only have that as long as you have natural scientists who recognize it as a final theory, articulate it, can explain it to lay persons. In order to explain the presence and the use of this fundamental theory. So it may be that this person standing pointed into the corner is in for, it might have sort of significant aspects on how we consider natural science, knowledge in general, because it's not sort of a side entity that is sort of like high temperature superconductivity, which may or may not work, but is not so central to our knowledge domain. This is really about the scientists themselves, about us doing science, interpreting the world, generating new aspects of the world all the time, and making maybe a problem for our standard interpretation of naturalism. As said again, this is just a line of thinking that you can enter from this place in the problem space. So wrapping up, I would say that full naturalism, if it is accepted, has potentially major implications for a problem space, for subjectivity, for cognition, and presumably also for experiential phenomena. If you work from this, if you take this seriously, and say if, then the whole set of problems would become different. You would have other worries, you would do different things, and you would be interested in different topics, I would say. It would impact the agenda for the various sciences involved in all sorts of ways. And the nice thing for someone who's interested in blobs of view is that this very idea, this very way of thinking would definitely be relevant within that agenda, in short. So concluding, basically I just want to say this: the notion of a blob of view provides an outline of a fully natural interpretation of a first-person animal point of view. It is a solution that comes with its own problem, so to say, to some extent. And this becomes only clearer clearer once we think through some of the extended implications of accepting naturalism, when you take it more serious than we have done to now. So that's it, end of the tour. I hope you enjoyed the show, and as again, for the final, it's all work in progress. Feedback is welcome, and please let me know if you have any questions.